And welcome back, Hornets. We are going to start today with, here we are again, and we're going to start today with looking at a parable from the Bible, and that is 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 40. Don't quote me on that one. I got to go back and look. So we're going to start and read because this is a huge thing that's referenced to a lot in our literature is the story, the parable from the Bible of David and Goliath. So the very first thing that I want you to do is to go to Edpuzzle, which is why I'm looking at this right now, and you're going to start by watching this less than 2-minute clip of David and Goliath. You need to answer the questions, yes, but this is just going to give you a quick overview of the story before we actually read the text from the NIV version of the Bible. So once you've watched this video, or once you watch this part of the video, you can pause me right now and go watch the David and Goliath video if you haven't already done that. So, all right. And I'm going to assume that you are back now with me and you're ready to look at your worksheet that you need to get from the teacher. So, and on this worksheet, it looks like this. It is from 1 Samuel 17, the NIV, the New International Version of the Bible, and it is the parable of David and Goliath. So, what's the very first thing that we do, guys, when we get a new text? Well, hopefully you wrote your name on it no matter what, right? So you put your name up here, and then you'll have noticed that we're looking at analyzing word meanings right here, which is what we've been working on, and that deals with technical, figurative, and connotative meanings. We also want to make sure we're looking if things are positive, negative, and neutral as we're reading through it. And we also get that this is a parable from the Bible, which is letting us know that this is a morality story from a very famous book in our culture. So, and just in case, I always make sure that we read the stories that we talk about as parables because we make lots of allusions to this story when we read about any time or anything that somebody smaller defeats somebody much bigger, or somebody that's weaker or seems weaker defeats someone who is more powerful. So when we were reading Harry Potter, you could almost even compare a David and Goliath story as Harry being David and Voldemort being Goliath. It's somebody who is much weaker and smaller defeats somebody much more powerful and bigger. Okay, so first thing, the other thing, after we do this stuff at the top, we want to make sure that we box our title. There we go. Now, books in the Bible don't necessarily have paragraphs. They kind of run a little bit like poetry in that they have lines. Okay. So we're looking at the verses that they have. So it's not lines, they have verses. So I'm going to start reading, and please remember, Miss Murray, her dyslexia sometimes gets the better of her. So I apologize if I mess any of this up. So 1 Samuel 17, New International Version, the parable of David and Goliath, chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces of war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Succoth and Isaiah. See, this is why Miss Murray, this is why dyslexic teachers should not read Hebrew. Stop. All right. Starting with verse 2. Saul and the Israelites assembled the camp in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Oh, see that's got that A next to it? Well, we're going to scroll down to the bottom where we're going to look and see what that A stands for. And that tells us that means he's about 9 feet 9 inches or 3 meters tall. Okay, that's what that footnote meant. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, We're going to go down there. There's a B next to it. Now, shekels is 125 pounds or 58 kilograms. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and on its iron point weighed 600 shekels, which we're going to look down there, and that C tells us that's about 15 pounds or about 6.9 kilograms. Okay. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And now we're cutting out part of it, and we're jumping to verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. But the lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock. I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." So now I'm skipping a little bit and going to verse 40. Then he took his staff in hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." Jumping to verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with sling and stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took the Philistine's sword and drew it from his sword and drew it from his sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judea surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines into the entrance of Gath and into the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaharim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered the camp. And by the way, we got the F down there that tells us that we have another. Oh, and I didn't put it on there. Never mind. So after you've watched the video, and now you were to read this. And remember, we're reading a parable. And a parable, I'm going to go back to the top. A parable from the Bible is part of folklore. It's part of the oral tradition that we've been talking about, which makes it, for all intensive purposes that we look at it, it's a story to teach us a lesson and a moral. So remember, within the 4 walls of our classroom and school, we're talking about this as a book and a story. And it was written to teach a lesson, and I'm not going to get into an argument about that with anybody. So there you go. Outside school and at church, we will talk a whole different ballgame, but right now that is where we are. So our purpose, I want you to write down the purpose of a parable and tell me who you think the audience is, the central idea of the story of David and Goliath. Give me the text structure, and then come up with the theme and the tone. Okay? And then when you're done, here you go. Just in case. You've got 7 questions that are looking at the plot, and it's just fill in the blank. Okay. And then at the bottom, it says that we're going to write at least 3 characteristics of David and 3 characteristics of Goliath based on the text. You can also use the video from Edpuzzle as well. Okay. And I want you to see if you can find and tell me how these characteristics of them are positive, negative, or neutral. Okay. So remember, characteristics are anything that describe what they look like, how they act, how they behave, things they have, how their feelings, things that make them characters in the story. So there you go. And when you get done with that, you get to turn it in and start on your part 4 from your Ready workbook on page 90 and 91 on the Goliath beetle. All right. Bye, guys.